Okay, so we just went over quartiles. Next, we're going to be looking at percentiles of data. So again, we're taking the exact same information we had before. Here's some IQ scores. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how to find what set of data are in a certain percentile of information. So let's say the very first question is, which data, or I guess you might say what data is in the first 40% of info. Okay? So remember, quartiles broke them up into sets of a quarter. So 25, 50, 75, and even technically 100. 40, we don't get a number split like that. So the very first thing we need to do is figure out how many pieces of data are in the set. How many pieces of data are in the set? 16. Great. So we have that number 16. What we're going to be doing is we're going to take this value and multiply by the percentage we're trying to find. Okay? Because there are 16 pieces of information, and remember, it's whole numbers here. So I have 16 pieces of data. How do I turn 40% into a decimal? That's right. We would divide it by 100. So in other words, this would be 0.40 or 0.4. So we're going to multiply 16 times 0.4. Take out our calculator here. And we get 16 times 0.4 equals 6.4. Okay, 6.4. Well, when I count through the data, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.4, there is no number there. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to round our values here. We rounded our value here. This is 6.4. So when we round downwards, because this is less than 5, so the sixth piece of information, and before that, because they're saying the first, so we find the sixth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and technically this number 6. Okay, and remember 6 is less than 6.4, so this makes sense because it should have been a value in between here at 6.4. All of these values are in the first 40% of the data. Okay, so this would be the first 40% of the info. So let's say they give us another percentage. For instance, let's say they go, oh, what is in the first, we'll call this B, first 25% of data. Okay, so let's turn this into a decimal. We know our number is still 16. 25 as a decimal, we divide it by 100, so we get 0.25. Let's figure out what this is. 16 times 0.25 gives us the number 4. Okay, the number 4. So let's count 4 pieces of data. We'll do it with purple here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So from 85 and before are the first 25%. Does that make sense from what we did with the quartiles in this information? Do you remember where it was split? It was split right in between here when we talked about the quartiles. So that makes perfect sense. We can find the percentage by just multiplying and counting these values. Now I'm going to give you a question that's a little more complex. What if they ask you, what do I use here? Purple. Question C. What is in the last 40%? Last 40%. Last 40%. Now when we do percentages, we're always counting from the first value up. Okay? Last 40%. Okay, that might be difficult though to find an actual value because remember the only real information we have here is that we know there are 16 pieces of data. They're asking for the last 40%. So in other words, just as a visual here, we use those happy faces again. Let's say we have a bunch of faces here. And when they say the last 40%, what they're saying is something like this. They want only this information. So which sets of data are in the last 40%? Well, when we find stuff, we're always finding it from the left to the right, just the way we read. Okay? That means what amount or what percentage of information is before that 40? How can we find that? 60. And how did you find that value? Yeah. Someone said they subtract 100 or add to 100. That's 100% right. You take the value of 100 because all of the data together is 100%. We would subtract the 40. And that means we're actually looking for the first 60. Okay? And we can find that the exact same way we've done the other things. We turn 60 into a decimal, so it's 0.6. 16 times 0.6 is equal to, take out our calculator, 16 times 0.6, 9.6. So we're looking for, 9.6. So we go up to our data. That was 6. This was the 7th value. This was the 8th value. This was the 9th value, and it was actually 9.6, so in between here. So we know everything before that would be the first 60%, but they're looking for the last 40. So that actually means everything after this to the end. All of this is in the last 40% of the data. Okay? So you really have to make sense of the question, whether they say the first or the remaining or the ending. Those words become very important when going through this. The process isn't too difficult. We just take those percentages, we multiply them by the total amount of numbers, and it'll give us an idea of where the information is before or after that percentage set. The questions when they ask you the first or the last sets of data, is that's where it becomes a little more difficult.